until the end. The sun started its daily journey across the sky. A month prior, a solar flare of immense power had decimated nearly every electronic on the planet. It was interesting that the very thing that gave Earth life was the very thing to be the catalyst for so much death. In its wake, it left a man stranded far from home, with a single task to return home in the midst of the chaos that ensued. He was on the home stretch now, moving through the trees with rifle in hand. A nearby hill seemed like a good vantage point to check his progress. With each step he took, his boots wore away at his feet and his armor glued to his chest. He couldn't recall the last time that he removed them. Finally, he reached the top of the hill, and to no surprise was met with a view of smoke plumes across the horizon. It was beginning to be all too normal of a sight. No food or no water left the unprepared increasingly desperate. Off in the distance, he could see his next destination, a multicolored water tower signifying the return to his quaint little home not far from it. Down below, he could see a huge field directly in his path. Probably smart to go around it. As he walked towards the edge of the tree line, he noticed that this field was well kept. Someone had livestock here, but none were anywhere to be seen. He knew one thing, though. Livestock are valuable, and someone would be protecting that value. Diverting his path deeper into the woodline, he noticed he was not the only one in the area. Calmly, he lay down on his stomach and propped his rifle up to peer through his scope. Out in the open walked a man, roughly 200 meters away. A looter that was skinny in stature, no holster for his pistol, and armor that was meant for someone much larger. The typical getup for someone scouting for resources to plunder. The looter was weaving between what little trees were scattered across the field, trying to get a lay of the land on wherever the livestock might be, more than likely to report back to others. The looter took one more step into the open, and suddenly his skull exploded into a pink mist and his body dropped instantly. The gunshot echoed through the woods, and the only view from the man's scope was a lifeless body slowly darkening the soil around it. His heart rate skyrocketed, and he froze. Where did the shot come from? He focused his view toward the direction he heard the gunshot from, but nothing could be seen. Every single movement he made suddenly became more deliberate and concentrated. Not a single movement out of place, or he would end up just like the looter. It felt like he did not move for an hour as the sun crept into the sky. He could not stay here. The plan was to get to the water tower by nightfall, but now every single movement took 10 minutes as he low-crawled away from the sound of the gunshot. No doubt the looter had friends that would be looking any time now. Inch by inch, his body maneuvered as far from that field as possible. Stomach growling and nearly out of water, he was on borrowed time to get out of this situation. He stopped to lay in the dirt for a moment and drink some water. The last little bit drained from his camelback, and a light gust of wind blew over him. Leaves rustled, and the light hum of the wind rushing by were accompanied by an unnatural sound. A low-pitched jingle, barely audible, could be heard nearby. The wind died down, and the sound went away. Another uneasy feeling overcame him as the next gust of wind creeped through the trees. There it was again, clanging, consistent. To the left? In front of him? The sound was incredibly close. The clinging continued. A trap, but where? On the ground was so much brush and foliage that no sign of anything could be seen, until he looked up. Hanging above him was a black bag holding only what he assumed to be an auditory trap. There was a trigger somewhere, and every movement felt like it would activate the trap and alert the shooter of his position. A single movement that would take 10 minutes now took 20. His hand took one stroke forward, his eyes closed, and a loud clang of pots and pans could be heard throughout the forest. Across the field, he could hear panicked shouts between a man and a woman. Upon opening his eyes, he looked up. The bag was still dangling there, and his hand lay directly on the trigger, a tripwire waiting to release the trap. Quickly, he backed off the trigger without letting the wire loose the trap. The low crawl he had grown so accustomed to by this point had gotten a little bit faster. He could still hear the commotion caused by the duo across the way. 15 meters from the trap now, he positioned himself to take aim at the runners. Easy to spot. They were panicked. Their mismatched armor not dissimilar to the corpse now baking in the field. They sprinted away until they mistakenly stopped to take a break deep in the woodland. What were they doing? They needed to keep going if they wanted to live. Sure enough, the second gunshot rang through the trees, this time from the north. In the next moments, the woman lay sprawled behind some foliage, but there was no doubt that she was dead. The shot came from the north. He was sure of it. The focus of his scope now trained in the direction he heard the shot. Panicked sprints and wheezing could be heard from the last man, but it was too late. The third gunshot burst through the air, knocking the man off his feet mid-sprint. He heard the heavy tumble to the ground, but his eyes were trained to the north in the direction of the shooter. There, a glimpse of a man tactically maneuvering through the brush, camouflaged, armored, and only a brief look of a large rifle in hand, but he vanished. Only a short distance away, the gargle of the last man could be heard, broken speech begging for his life. Nothing could save him now. Ignoring the man's desperate pleas for life, his eyes trained on the north. Sundown was approaching, only a few short hours left of daylight, and he had nothing to aid his vision in the night. A gut feeling told him that the shooter did, though. His only advantage was that he was able to stay hidden from the shooter, for now. A few minutes passed, and one final gurgle from the dying man left the woods completely silent again. Every single leaf on the opposing side of the field to the north was surveyed. The shooter still remained to be found. He started to question if he could even make the shot, even if he found the shooter. The furthest target he had ever hit was 200 meters, and this looks like double that. His stomach grumbled, and the day's heat made him desperate for water. Doubt was his enemy now. Only desperation kept him going after all this. A red glow washed over the thicket. The sun crusted the horizon in its final moments of the day. Bloodshot eyes from staring down his rifle scope left him tired and now hopeless. Maybe he could just walk away and live to see another day. Maybe he could sleep here and wake up free tomorrow. Maybe this was all he needed. For a moment like this, to help him realize that he's no soldier, and he's no use, and that there's no point. His eyes squinted shut, but in his last moment of consciousness, a squirrel, in view from the scope, reawakened him. The squirrel scurried along the ground until it abruptly ran the opposite direction. And there he saw the shooter. The shooter's head completely blocked by a tree, his legs obstructed by foliage, but his torso exposed. The large rifle that the shooter was holding pointed perpendicular to his current position. A torso covered in armor was all he could barely see, but in the crevice under the shooter's armpit was an unarmored spot. Could he really do it? Those people would have killed him too. It's all about survival. But he had gotten this far without killing anyone. Why did he have to now? The shooter would have given him no such chance. A calm exhale escaped his lungs, and he pulled the trigger. The weight of the shooter's armor only made his body do a subtle twitch at the impact of the bullet, and blood began pooling out from the wound. Relief washed over as he finally stood up. He couldn't remember where the other bodies were, but the one still lying in the field, maybe that one had water. Panting, he made his way to the first victim, skull split open and flies already infesting. Only a little pistol with 3 rounds in it. No water. Did they know he would die here? Onward he went to the shooter's corpse. He knew where that was. Each step felt like it took more effort than the last. He got closer to the body of the shooter, and guilt washed over him. He was still alive. Medical supplies were scattered around the body as the shooter had tried to self-medicate. His eyes trailed up to where the body lay. The armor, same as his own. The face of his childhood friend, his best friend. It had only been a few minutes. He ran to the body and immediately ripped off the armor to find the wound placed exactly where he was aiming. He started pulling out his own medical supplies, only to hear his friend murmur softly that it was too late. Tears poured from both their eyes. As he scurried for medical supplies again, his friend grabbed his hand and managed to get out 2 final words. "It's okay." Those were the last words his best friend said to him before exhaling his final breath. Darkness had finally arrived, and he rested his head on his friend's now lifeless body. All he could do was sob. The forest returned to its normal state, and the sounds of nature only accompanied by one man mourning his friend.